Hello and welcome to the Bad Take. My name is Himal.
And my name is Tamara.
Today we are going to talk about an interesting group of people known as radicals. Tamara, what does the word radical mean to you?
Well, I think the literal meaning to me is something like a person or a situation which has a stark difference to the status quo, or something that has the potential to spark change.
Right.
That's how I understand it. But in the context of what we are talking about, these radicals that we are talking about, that's not how the word is used, right?
Yeah, I think the word is understood to mean like you're familiar with the term SJW,
Yes.
social justice warrior.
Yeah.
Which has a negative connotation to it.
Yeah.
I personally disagree with that. I think it's a lazy criticism. I think it's a very lazy criticism of the progressive movement. But in Sri Lanka, I think the word radical is used to kind of derogatorily refer to people like progressives who are who are seeking change and who are trying to like establish a more egalitarian society, I suppose, right? And those people are referred to as radicals. Rightly or wrongly,
and especially progressives who are vocal and who don't hesitate to voice their view.
Right.
So I want to figure out what makes someone radical in the eyes of these critics.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is it does it have something to do with their behaviors or the stuff that they talk about?
Right.
What does it entail?
Right. That's a good question. Like we said earlier, it's like an umbrella term for an entire movement right now, I think, right? There's a very vocal group of people online, especially on Facebook, who are advocating things like secularism and reconciliation.
Yeah.
They're talking about race relations and equal rights and some even gay rights, I think.
Yes.
And Sri Lanka is a very conservative society, so a lot of these are very thorny topics and very sensitive, very touchy topics, and people have strong feelings about them one way or the other. And anyone who brings these topics up and tries to engage in conversation with them are referred to as radicals, like we said in the intro. But I don't think it's just that. I think it's to do with their certain lifestyle choices that they've made. Sometimes even the way they look. I think.
Okay.
Like for example, I mean, there's almost like a radical stereotype, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Like you get guys in man buns and like with a
tattoos.
and a beard, and it's not accurate at all, I think. But I think that's the stereotype. Although once again we have to emphasize that this is a purely Sri Lankan take on this word, right? It's
true. Yeah.
It's quite different to how it's understood elsewhere.
Oh yeah. We have to mention that we are just trying to understand how this word is being used in the Sri Lankan context and mostly on social media.
Right.
And like what I understood from what you said was it's not just based on what these progressives talk about.
Yeah.
It's also based on their fashion sense and the lifestyles they choose to follow or not to follow.
Yeah.
So all these people are kind of lumped into
one category of that's right.
So is it fair to say that conservative Sri Lankan society feels like these people have no place here and that's why they get all the hate that we see them getting?
I mean, there's clearly a very negative perception of these activists. You constantly see accusations being thrown around of being anti-Buddhist, anti-national. I've seen comments to the effect on Facebook, of basically alleging that these people lack a moral compass,
right?
Because a lot of them identify as not being religious,
right. Okay.
Some of them have been accused of pushing a Western agenda,
right? Okay,
which is not in line with Sri Lankan traditional values.
So they're branded moral nihilists and materialists and all those other.
That's some of. I think that's some of the criticism.
Right. Okay.
I mean,
I think the crux of it is people think that these progressives or radicals are being contrarian just for the sake of it.
Yeah, that's another criticism, I think.
And I myself have been accused of this.
Right.
When I first kind of came out to my friends as an atheist, as a non-believer,
Right.
the criticism that I got was, you probably think you're better than us because you read about all this in a book, and now you want to be different, and that's why you embrace this whole secular attitude. That's what I got. So I guess this is it's a similar case is happening with all these other progressives.
Yeah, I think that's another common criticism, that they're trying to like look cool, or
Yeah.
look to appear to sound smarter than
Yeah.
your average Nimal, Siripala, whatever. Not Nimal, Siripala, De Silva. Nimal and Siripala. Anyway, I mean, I can kind of see
Mm.
where that criticism comes from, because let's face it, a lot of these people have a certain smugness to them, right?
Yeah. An air of superiority.
Yeah. There's a clear air of superiority in some cases, not everyone.
What I've seen is most of these people who happen to be pretty smart, by the way,
Yeah,
come across as very satirical
right.
and sometimes a little offensive if you want to look at it that way. So I guess that doesn't appeal to some people.
Right.
If someone comes at you with a different opinion and sort of, tries to mock you,
Okay.
even with the best of intentions, some
Right.
people don't take it lightly. So I guess that happens a lot, and I don't see this happening here a lot, but internationally, most of these progressives try to brand whoever has the slightest leaning towards the right from where they stand. They're immediately labeled Nazi,
Right.
which is a very strong word, a lauded word, and they kind of try to paint them in that light and bash them to an extreme that I don't think is necessary. So things like that, maybe it could be because they are just fed up by seeing everything that's going around, and they don't want to be subtle about it. They just want to get a point across, however rude or offensive that may seem. It could be the case, but then again, that's not how communication works with people, right?
Right.
Because if you want to get people in on a cause that you support and you believe in, you have to be, in turn, you have to be inclusive yourself,
Right.
and open and welcoming to differing points of
Right.
view, I guess.
These are like broad generalizations, right? Like it's these so-called radicals. They're not like a homogeneous group. They have different perspectives within their groups also, right?
True.
But like you said, they're all lumped together as one anti-nationalist, anti-Buddhist, anti-Sinhalese group, which is not really the case.
Yeah.
What are some of the issues that these so-called radicals bring to the fore, you think?
I see a multitude, actually. There are some very prominent ones. For example, race.
Right.
And reconciliation.
Right.
Especially after the war and of all the events that unfolded in the aftermath. I kind of feel like that has died down a little, because every week there's some other issue that pops up. For example, a very recent. Let's come back to race again, but I want to mention a more recent example, which was related to the use of elephants in the Kandy Perahara. So there was a lot of people who were vocal against how these animals are treated, and whether it's right to have them basically as playthings and for the sake of entertainment.
Right.
And there was a lot of people having very heated arguments about this.
Yeah, I noticed.
Media. And these progressives, this was one course all these radical progressive people got behind, while knowing full well that it's something has been happening in Sri Lanka for a long time, owing to the traditions that we follow, and the Buddhist culture that we have. And most people saw that as contrarian, and they saw it as an attack on the religion and the culture itself.
Right.
And they took issue with that.
Right. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. My personal position is that I'm also not crazy about elephants being used in the Perahara. But you have to look at these issues within their cultural context, right? And I guess sometimes I mean, it's well intentioned most of the time, I think, but it's the outrage is a little misplaced, I think, and I don't always agree with the way they frame some of their concerns.
Right.
But yeah, so there's the parahera, and reconciliation is another area in which these activists. I don't know if it's right to call them activists. That these people have interesting and I think frankly very progressive views on.
Yeah.
And of course, that's the topic of religion. I think it's safe to say a fairly large percentage of these people are either they are or they are perceived to be anti-religious or I mean they are constantly like I see that I see a lot of them advocating secularism, if not atheism. And that also is seen as an attack on Buddhism.
It's the funny thing is it's not just the people who advocate secularism or atheism. Even some of the more liberal Buddhists and liberal Muslims, for example, get painted with the same brush. So it's like you rightly mentioned, I think earlier, it's more of an issue of people overly generalizing this group,
right,
and trying to shed a bad light on them.
Yeah. Among other things, they talk about especially recently in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision to decriminalize homosexuality. In the wake of that, there was a lot of conversation in Sri Lanka about maybe doing the same here. Clearly, these are important issues that are worth talking about. These conversations do need to take place.
It's about time that we talk about this stuff.
It's just that it seems like the mainstream Sri Lankan audience is not receptive to it at all.
Yeah, I think there was a little buzz earlier about decriminalizing homosexuality here before the Indian Supreme Court decision came about. I think there was talk of a bill in Parliament.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
But then what people pointed out was, even if that becomes law, it doesn't really matter when people don't generally accept homosexuality.
And the majority doesn't accept it.
So what we need to do first is to get people to understand that it's a naturally occurring thing. It's nothing out of the ordinary, and after that the law will come.
Right.
So yeah,
but I do think these guys have an important role to play in that regard, because they can lay that groundwork, right?
Yes.
Of changing public opinion.
Yeah.
And my concern is that are they really going about it the right way?
Exactly. We should talk about whether they are succeeding at it.
Right.
Because from what I've seen, this air of superiority and the smugness that some of these people have,
some, not all,
everyone, does not help.
Right.
And the conservative majority always points their fingers towards these people and accuse them of being elitist and morally superior because of that reason. So then the question is, how can progressives do a better job at having these conversations?
Right. Also, I think we must mention that we are speaking only about the Sinhala progressive community, right? The people I'm talking about are people who write primarily in Sinhala.
Right. Yeah.
The English speaking activist community is, I think that's another topic altogether, because you see on the one hand, you see those guys having their conversation is a bit more, I don't want to say evolved a bit, it's a bit more for example, if you take in the West, they've moved on from securing basic rights to they moved on to a different level of that conversation, like down to the details. For example, the debate about the gender pronouns.
Yeah, we don't see anything of that sort here.
No, but that's because that is a luxury that they can afford in the West.
Right.
Because they have secured rights that marginalized communities in Sri Lanka don't necessarily have. We have a long way to go, clearly.
Yes, true.
And I think these so-called radicals play a crucial role. It's just that, like I said earlier, the majority are not only are they not receptive, they're downright antagonistic towards them. And I think maybe, as well-intentioned as they are, these people kind of need to look inwardly and look at their own message and maybe figure out whether they're communicating it right, or maybe I mean, is it the message? Is it even the messenger?
Yes.
the problem here, and that is a conversation that they need to have among themselves, maybe
True.
internally.
Yeah, I think we've established that there is a leap that the audience has to make,
Right.
but we also have to understand that there's another leap the messenger and the message has to make. Right.
Yeah, like you have to make your message a bit more palatable to
Yeah.
an overwhelmingly conservative
Yeah,
audience, right?
It's interesting that you mentioned about the Sinhala predical,
Right.
because what I've seen is if you're a English speaking progressive,
Right.
then that adds another layer of superiority in the eyes of
Oh yeah, for
the
sure, for sure.
the critical
Yeah,
majority,
yeah.
because then it's like you're even more divorced from the ground realities in Sri
Yeah.
Lanka, because you speak
Yeah.
English.
Even if that may not actually be the case, that's
Yeah.
how you're perceived, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So I think maybe a good starting point is to maybe a bit more relatable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a shame that we can't talk about Tamil discourse
True.
because neither
Yeah.
of us speak the language, so I don't know what's going on over there at all. And if any listeners out there, please willing to just enlighten us, we'll be happy to listen. But yeah, getting back to the Sinhala crowd, there is a lot of good content that they produce, and judging by the engagement levels on Facebook, they're doing something right, clearly. It's just that most of the time it feels like, I think I've noticed that in the international scene also, in within the Sri Lankan context, it feels like they're preaching to the choir, it's like
and it's great that they are using platforms like Facebook,
Right.
and even Twitter, for example, to do this, but that has to go beyond that.
right. I think it's more Facebook than Twitter in Sri
true.
Lanka.
That's true.
Whereas internationally, you see a lot of it
Yeah.
taking place on Twitter.
Yeah, that's true.
A lot of these social justice battles are being fought on Twitter.
Yeah.
Right. No, but I don't think that's necessarily the case here. A lot of it happens on Facebook, though.
So what I've seen is, if we want to sort of go through this process quickly,
Right.
progressives have to reach audiences beyond these online platforms.
Right.
It's true that more and more people are coming online every day,
Right.
and all these younger audiences, younger generations will have more access to these, and it'll be easier to reach them through these platforms.
Right.
But then again, for example, our fathers and mothers generation, these are stuff, something like LGBTQ rights, for example, is not something they wouldn't even think about, or
Right.
they wouldn't even know about.
Right.
So there are those audiences that we need to tap into to have a constructive conversation.
Right. So yeah, I think in conclusion, there is no denying that they're doing some good and important work, crucial work even. But since clearly Sri Lankan audiences are not very receptive to the message, maybe kind of sit down and figure out a way to kind of repackage it. Because at the end of the day, these conversations do need to take place, and somebody's got to do it, right?
Yep.
So let us know what you guys think. I'm on Twitter at HimalKK.
And I'm on Twitter at Master Tamara. We'd very much like to know if you know about any research that has been done into this, or any literature that you know about. That'd be pretty interesting, because you can find a lot of stuff if you talk about America or the West, because the conversations in the West dominate all the social media channels and all that. People don't pay attention, even as it happens in front of their eyes. They don't pay attention to the infrastructure behind it, behind all these conversations. I think it's something people should, academics in this field who study this thing should look at.
All right, catch you guys next time. Peace.